Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar series. We're so happy you could join us today for today's webinar on protecting your nonprofit from financial fraud. We're excited to partner with your part-time controller for this webinar to get some of the best financial processes advice from them on how to add another layer of protection on top of IT and technical preventative measures. We're going to talk about wire fraud in particular today with some examples, but we'll cover other scams and schemes also. And we also invite you to subscribe to our email list. We don't send a lot of emails. We just send updates on the webinars that are coming up that we offer. So you can attend in real time and ask your questions as you can today. We have a lot of free resources and downloadable material on our website too. Before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, just a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish your missions through the effective use of technology. We have about 40 staff, and we started in the DC metropolitan area over 20 years ago, and we now serve nonprofits across the US. We're technology experts, and we are consistently named a top 500 managed services provider by Channel Futures, and that's an honor that we received again in 2021. So let's get into the webinar today, and I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Carole Woodard, and I'm the Marketing Director at Community IT, and also the moderator for today's webinar. Before working in marketing, I was a project manager here. And before that, I was the IT director at a large international nonprofit and a program director at a small national nonprofit, where I was the point of contact as a client of Community IT back in the day. So I have been on both sides of the table, and I love how Community IT has a lot of staff here with experience working at nonprofits. And we really get the community and the constraints and opportunities and needs. Many of you submitted questions at registration, which our panelists will do their best to answer. I'm joined today by Carole Melvin from your part-time controller, YPTC. Carole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Carolyn. Good afternoon. My name is Carole Melvin. I'm a senior manager and market leader for YPTC's Washington, D.C. office. I began my career as an auditor for Deloitte, and I am a CPA, much like many of my colleagues at YPTC. We are ex-auditors, and many of us are CPAs. My combined nonprofit experience includes 20 years of accounting, auditing, and audit management, budgeting, and best practices in nonprofit board administration, including serving as CFO for several nonprofit organizations. And like Carolyn, there's another parallel. I also was a client of YPTC before jumping over to the other side. So in my current position at YPTC, I serve as the senior manager market leader for the DC, Maryland, and Virginia region. I facilitate relationships with clients and staff, conduct practice development, and I also provide accounting, reporting, and management services to nonprofit clients myself. I'm a member of the AICPA, the American Institute of CPAs, and the Greater Washington Society of CPAs, and I serve as a member of the GWSCPA nonprofit section. A little bit about YPTC. Your part-time controller is a professional services firm that specializes in nonprofit financial management with nearly 30 years of nonprofit expertise. Next year, we will celebrate 30 years. Our services include accounting, reporting, data visualization, and best practices, to name just a few. We have over 1,000 clients currently located throughout the US, as well as clients in several other countries. We are a staff of over 300 and growing, working in our 8 regional offices and in our YPTC Anywhere nationwide virtual office, serving clients on-site or remotely, providing nonprofits with accounting services nationwide. And we are very proud to be voted a best place to work for over a decade. And this past year, we were named to Accounting Today's list of best accounting firms to work for. And now I will turn it over to Matt to introduce himself.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for the introduction, Carole. It's really good to have you join me today to talk about a topic about combating wire fraud. My name is Matthew Eshleman. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT, and I've just celebrated my 20 years with the company. I actually have a little bit of time before that as an intern, and have now been in my current role for a while and really focus on helping our internal team manage the IT infrastructure for the 140 clients and 6,500 people that we support, and then also am a resource for organizations to help them manage their cybersecurity as well. So I look forward to getting into lots of great content today. We've got a lot packed in here, and I think it's going to be a really valuable and engaging session. As Carolyn mentioned, feel free to chat in questions as they come along. But first, I actually do have a poll for you. Would love to get a sense of who's attending the webinar today. So go ahead and just take a minute or so to quickly respond in terms of what is your role at your organization, you in the IT department, finance, operations, other. Admin. So just to get a sense of who is attending the webinar today, we've got a lot of content, I think, for all interested parties. So it looks like we're pretty evenly distributed here in terms of people playing lots of different roles at their organization. So that is fantastic. Today, we are going to be talking a little bit. We'll start with a little bit of the cybersecurity landscape. We'll talk a little bit specifically about wire fraud and what that means and how organizations can protect themselves. We're going to show some specific examples. I think it's particularly helpful to kind of see how these types of attacks are perpetrated, and perhaps you'll see some techniques that seem very reflective of what you've experienced at your own organization. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to protect your organization. So I think it's really important to move from understanding these concepts to talking about the specific steps that you can take at your organization to help protect the data and your organization's finances. So jumping in and talking a little bit about the cybersecurity landscape, if you've been on our webinars, some of these things may seem, we like to start with laying this groundwork. So what we see as an organization, as I said, that supports about 6,500 nonprofit staff, is that we see that there are persistent and ongoing attacks against your online digital identity. So if you can log into something from the cloud, it means the bad guys can too. And so we see that happening all the time. We also see that organizations are targeted with really sophisticated spear phishing, and we'll go into that in more detail as part of the presentation. We also see that organizations are targeted because of the work that they do. Mostly that applies to kind of think tank and policy groups. I think especially with some of the current political environment that we are seeing now with Russia and the Ukrainian threat. We're seeing organizations that work on international issues specifically targeted. And then we also see schemes targeting vendors such as ourselves, and I think vendors like YPTC as well, that have access and insight into a great number of organizations. So organizations like ourselves are targeted as well. We also see that organizations are not always aware of all of the new security tools. There are lots of good products out there that can help organizations combat these increasing security threats. And I think we also see that nonprofit organizations generally have fewer cybersecurity fraud controls in place. We also know that a lot of nonprofit organizations have not taken those proactive steps to implement things such as an incident response plan. And so that data comes from N10's cybersecurity report from back in 2018. And so that is something that we see pretty commonly across the organizations that we're working with. And then we also know that there is a real impact to these financial a real financial impact of these threats to nonprofit organizations. So fraud is not just something that happens to somebody else or happens to only big organizations, but we see that data from Kaspersky's small to mid-sized business impact shows that there are direct costs of about $149,000 associated with cyber incidents. So Carole, are there things that you see in the work that you do as well here?
Yeah, and that really mirrors what we are seeing, Matt. So we know that nonprofits can be particularly attractive targets for fraudsters. We know that often executive directors who are passionate about their missions are often naturally trusting of others who share their interest or at least pretend to. And board members who are dedicated and talented in their particular fields may not be as well versed in financial issues and internal controls in some cases. And we also know that nonprofits of all sizes may have limited resources available to address the internal controls. So that $149,000 that you mentioned could potentially be very devastating to some of these small nonprofits. And this makes them vulnerable to those who use as an opportunity to commit fraud. And as you said, nonprofits are particularly vulnerable because they think it will never happen to them. We had one case of a client, and this was in the early days of the pandemic. Seems like a long time ago, but in the summer of 2020, one of our clients, and this was in the news, so I'm not breaking any confidentiality here, but one of our clients, Phil Abundance, who provides food to people in need in Philadelphia, they were scammed out of nearly $1 million in a cyber attack. And this was at a time when they were serving far more people than ever before because of the pandemic. And, here they are serving this great need, and then to prey upon a social philanthropic organization, it's almost unthinkable, but that's why we're talking about this, because we do have to think about it. So we'll discuss this, the details of this case a little bit later in our presentation, but as you said, Matt, these the fishers who targeted Phil Abundance, they were sophisticated, and it can happen to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the data that we take a look at, this is provided from the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. And so this shows just the increase in the amount of cyber crime over time. So here we can see, starting in 2016, there was about $1.5 billion worth of cybercrime activity. You take that all the way up into 2020, and we're now at 4.2 billion. So that's as Carole helpfully added in here, over 165% increase of kind of direct total losses. And so this is not something that just happens to somebody else. This is something that happens to organizations within the the community that we serve, and that rate is only increasing. So this is something that we also keep tabs on and is mirrored by our own data. The number of cyber attacks that we see launched against our nonprofit clients is not going down over time, but it is in fact continues to go up. I think it's also important for organizations to understand that this is a cyber criminal enterprise. This is not just the genius hacker in somebody's basement doing this for kind of fun, but there are in fact organized cybercrime adversaries that are well funded, and this is a business venture for them. So up here, I have some iconography from CrowdStrike, which is an endpoint detection and response group. These adversaries represent Fancy Bear, which is a Russian-based hacking group that goes after is a state-sponsored actor that goes after international groups and businesses. And then also we've got Cozy Bear, which is another Russian-based group, along with Pinchy Spider, which is responsible for a lot of ransomware attacks. And we also actually just today, some reporting came out that actors such as Evil Corp is responsible for over $100 million in earning from cyber crime. And so we can when we think about this as not being, opportunistic hacking, but really focused criminal enterprises, I think it can help to change our perspective and the protections that we need to have in place to help combat these threats. And when we think about cybersecurity, this is a graphic that we use at Community IT quite a lot, where we talk about cybersecurity protections really being first rooted in policy and then training and awareness for staff. That's really our first line of defense. Then once we have that out of the way, or invested in, then we can focus on some of the other technical areas where there may be some specific technology solutions in place related to protecting your digital identity, the data that your organization has, the devices that you're using, your network perimeter, such as it is, that could be at an office or now perhaps that's your home or just your personal office, the web protections. And then after we have those things in place, then it may be appropriate to move on to next gen tools. But we really want to root the protections that we put in place at our organizations with policy and training.
Right. And that training is so important because the technology and the process controls, are useless if we don't have the humans that are involved actually, employing those practices. So we know many nonprofits have sensitive data about the vulnerable people that they serve in their missions, but are they doing a good job of securing it? And it's really important to note that as nonprofits think about this, they need to think about this across the organization. This is not solely the IT department's problem or the finance department's concern, and it includes beyond the development and the fundraising folks as well. It's the program folks, it's everyone's job to be aware and follow the policy. We know of one nonprofit that sent an email with an unencrypted file that included personal information about their constituents, sexual assault survivors. So, what happens when a leak of those child sex abuse survivors' names, gets leaked, or domestic abuse survivors get posted on some list? The results could be catastrophic, even deadly. So you need to ask yourself if you're treating that data with the respect it deserves, and are we taking the necessary steps to prevent that? We also know that often nonprofits will have either some homegrown or customized software systems that may also make them more likely to be vulnerable. And they don't often have that dedicated IT person, and someone in the organization will be charged with putting together the security policy. So it's really, there's a lot of different pressures on the nonprofits. And another one is that another pressure in the cybersecurity landscape is that donors want nonprofits to spend only a certain amount of money on overhead. And they don't realize that their own contributions may be at risk because nonprofits may not have the ability to protect that data or the funds that they get from those donors. We are starting to see that change, especially in the last few years. We've seen some of the larger foundations actually establish cyber initiatives to respond to growing cyber threats. So we are seeing a response to this increase in cyber activity that Matt showed us.
Yeah, I think that is an encouraging trend to see. And then I think it's also, I think good that we're having, kind of this joint webinar, because I think this is one of those areas where, responding to wire fraud, it's not just a technology issue, it's not just a finance issue, but it's something that, many different departments need to work on and collaborate together in order to have the best protection. So we'll take another opportunity to ask a poll question here. So for you, in your organization, have you experienced any of these types of cyber attacks? So whether that be spam or spear phishing or an account compromise, whenever somebody else other than the intended person has had access to your account, maybe your organization has been impacted by, kind of the standard malware or virus activity, or maybe ransomware, or maybe, you or your organization has been a victim of wire fraud. It'd be good just to understand the landscape and see where it mirrors, some of the broader trends that we see. So give folks just a few more seconds to respond in. This is multiple choice, and it would not be unexpected if your organization maybe has been victimized by some or all of these different controls here. So thanks for that response, and we'll share the results so you can see everybody's experience. And so again, not uncommon or maybe unexpected. I would expected 100% of organizations to say that they've seen spam or spear phishing attacks. Again, about 15% of organizations have had an account compromise. 20%, virus malware, 33% up in that range. About 15% of the respondents have said they've been their organization's been a victim of wire fraud, and then a small percentage, 6%, has experienced ransomware. And I would say that really does, I think, mirror our own experience of trends. So one of the things that we'll be talking about, and I'll actually be doing a presentation on in 2 months, is just the continuing trend of our nonprofit incident report. And so here we can see there are 2 scalings of the data here, but we can see that, yes, most organizations, or we see a lot of attacks that are email-based, so again, spam and spear phishing, with a significant number of account compromises occurring, and that number has been increasing over time. And that number, will, as I was looking at the data from 2021, continues to increase. So that's something that we're really attentive to. Overall, the number of wire fraud attacks or successful wire fraud cases that we see where an organization has suffered some financial loss is low overall. But as Carole mentioned, that amount or that loss can really be significant. So if an organization sends $1 million out the door, that's a tremendous financial loss. And then we are seeing an increasing sophistication in the kind of number and maybe near misses of those wire fraud attacks that our organizations experience. So let's have Carole talk a little bit about asking some of those questions to help better understand your organization's risk profile.
Thanks, Matt. So if you are a nonprofit, it's very likely that you are processing donations. You may have online event registrations. You are most likely storing some sort of personal information for program participants, collecting information on donors, or membership subscribers, initiating online vendor payments. And if so, your entity is at risk for cybersecurity threats. We know that 2 main reasons that nonprofits are ideal targets for hackers and cyber criminals. We mentioned that 1, they don't see themselves as target and therefore don't prepare adequately often. And 2, cyber criminals, as Matt said, they're very sophisticated. They view nonprofits as easy prey, sitting on a wealth of personal information about their support staff, donors, volunteers, and the communities that they serve. Donor records, sensitive client data, confidential details about employees are all at risk of threat. And we know that if nonprofits weren't paying attention before, or they weren't prioritizing that in their budget, due to limited resources, that complacency may have ended after the 2020 ransomware attack on Blackbaud, which many of our nonprofit clients use as a financial system, Blackbaud and Razor's Edge. And this affected many organizations, charities in the United States. So, it may have been nice to have for some nonprofit organizations, but now cyber security policies and protection is a must-have. because we know that for nonprofits, reputation is everything. If an organization suffers a breach because it was careless with data, they're going to lose donors, and that nonprofit's reputation and the ability to raise money, may be forever jeopardized. So it really is, it is really critical. And, that sort of brings to the forefront a lot of these data protection laws. So if you are, doing any of the following on this slide, you do need to become aware and make sure you're following data protection laws. So in general, these laws require businesses who maintain personal information to have safeguards in place to protect that personal information, have protocols in place to notify individuals if a data breach does occur. And there's not really one all-encompassing federal data privacy law. There are some like HIPAA that covers healthcare, but every state will have different data breach legislation. Maryland, Virginia, New York have all, increased their, broadened their cybersecurity legislation. But even if your nonprofit doesn't have a physical presence in a particular state, if it's collecting personal information about a resident of that state, it typically must comply with that state's laws. So you may need to research other individual state laws as well.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.